All right. I'm Doug Thornell. When I'm not at Oxford University, I am the CEO of a public affairs and political consulting firm called SKDK. I want to thank again NYU's Bradamus Center and Oxford for hosting this series on American politics. I think we all love doing this. It's a great way to have some really thoughtful conversation that's bipartisan and informed by a lot of different things. So honored to be here. This is a great panel of people that I admire, who are at the top of their field and respected, not just in politics, but in corporate America, in academia. They all do a lot of work with a lot of different types of clients. Let me start first with my friend Todd Harris. He is a top Republican ad maker. He's the guy that Democrats hate seeing on the other side when we're doing races. He founded Something Else Strategies. He was an advisor to Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential campaign, worked for John McCain in 2000, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and is also a key advisor to a lot of the different Republican committees. Next to him is Stephanie Cutter, who is the founder of Precision Strategies. She was the deputy campaign manager for President Obama's reelect. She's worked in the White House. She worked for Ted Kennedy. She's done it all, and she also happens to be the only person on this panel with an Emmy nomination for her work as a producer on the inauguration. Next to Stephanie is Kevin Madden. He's a senior partner at Penta, was a longtime Republican strategist, on TV all the time, a CNN commentator, top advisor to Romney in 2008 and 2012, and was a top House leadership aide to the Majority Whip. Majority Leader. Yep. And last but not least is John Anzalone. He is the founder of Impact Research. He's one of the very top pollsters in the field. Was President Biden's pollster in 2020. Has helped dozens of governors and House members and senators get elected. So great panel. I'm honored to be the moderator here. And this is a panel on what to watch for. So we're all going to be fortune tellers. There's going to be times where I'm going to ask these folks to get into their time machines and jump ahead a little bit. But one question that I have, and I've been thinking a lot about this for a while, and we haven't talked about it at all, is the debates. And last in 2020 we had only two presidential debates. There was a third that I believe we didn't do because of the president's health at the time, President Trump's health. But here's what I want to ask our panelists. I want you to switch parties, okay? And I'll start with Todd here. I want you to advise the Biden campaign on whether or not he should debate in 2024 against Donald Trump. We're assuming that Donald Trump and Biden are the nominees, okay? I know there may not, it's not set in stone, but let's start there.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I always love coming to these NYU events ever since 2016. Every time I've been in Europe and I tell people I'm a Republican, it's met with like stunned silence. And so it's nice to be so warmly welcomed here. Yeah, he should absolutely debate President Trump. I think that were Biden not to do it, it would reinforce it. One of the worst things, the worst kind of gaffes or mistakes you can make in politics are the self-reinforcing ones. So any mistake that reinforces a preconceived notion, particularly one that is an underlying negative. So every time, when Romney said corporations are people too, it was devastating for him because there was already this sense that he was like a corporate elitist who couldn't relate to the average person. So were Biden not to debate, it would underscore and put an exclamation mark next to this idea that he's that he's simply too old for it. I would also say, based on past performance, assuming that both of them make it through the debate without any sort of physical issue, I think Biden got the best of Trump last time in the debate. So yeah, I would absolutely tell him to do it.
Stephanie, you're advising President Trump. Do you advise him to debate or not? He's not debating now.
Yes. Let me also say thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to be with my colleagues, sometimes competitors. These guys are the best of the best. I would advise Donald Trump to debate Joe Biden. I agree that Biden got the best of Trump in 2016, but I don't think the Trump folks believe that. I also think that the Trump folks believe that Biden is not up to it. Biden has more to gain by having a relatively steady performance. Trump has a lot to gain by basically prosecuting the last 4 years under Biden. And reminding everybody about whatever it is he wants to remind people of the 4 years under Donald Trump. And everybody is already familiar with Trump's debate style, which doesn't necessarily include full sentences or a coherent argument. That's his style. That's what we're used to. So a gaffe with Trump is not as noticeable as it would be with Biden. So, yes.
Mr. Madden?
Well, again, thank you for having me. This has been great. Given the immense level of talent on this panel, I feel a little bit like a bastard at a family picnic. Little out of place.
But not a nudist.
Yeah, so I would give a couple of, I would have like 4 pieces of advice. I mean, I think first I would say, yes, you have to debate. You're the leader of the free world. It's incumbent upon you to, as the incumbent, to make the case for your leadership vision and what you've done. I think secondly, and this is probably one of the most important truisms for any sort of debate prep or debate advice is, if you're not on offense in a debate, you've lost. So I would make sure that President Biden was very aggressive in prosecuting not only his record, but his case for the future. And I think the case for the future is how you sort of neutralize the idea that he's too old, right? That's not a foolproof plan, but the more you talk about the future and promise what the future is going to look like in your role and sort of bringing up new leadership and your vision for the party, I think that's important. Third, I would give some advice that I give to my son in baseball is pitch from the stretch. Don't have a big, long wind-up. Just get it right over the plate. Be very economical with your argument. And because I think when Biden tends to sort of like, I'm going to go off the teleprompter a little bit here, and I'm going to sort of meander and tell some real personal stories or anecdotes. I think personalization is important, but I think he tends to get less disciplined when he doesn't focus really acutely on like the message at hand. And then lastly is optimism. Optimism. I think one of the things that really troubles the most important swing voters in the country is the pessimistic doomsday scenario and the chaos that Trump has as a sort of brand. I think he tries to use it to his advantage, and many times he very effectively does. But the more optimistic candidate, the candidate says, I understand the problems of people like you, and I have a plan to address those, always wins, and I think those are the most effective sort of pillars of debate advice.
Anzo?
All right. First, I want to check the box for Rob Collins and say Tim Scott.
Okay.
I want to get that out of here.
Duly noted.
Done that, and so
It's in the minutes.
No, listen. First, you have to debate, but I want to bring up my favorite pollster's line, Joel Bennison, who always says that presidential races are about the future, not the past. But I do think now that I was going to say that and stick with it until I heard, Stephanie, say about you got to litigate. Now you have a former president and a president. So like we've never had this like in modern history, right? And so you actually do have to litigate a little bit of what you did. You got to litigate what the so if I'm the Republican, what the problems are in America. Rob Collins actually outlined that as well. But I think that this was Trump's big mistake in 2020 is that he actually never laid out in his TV ads what he had done. Like, except for the very end, there was a F-1 ad, which was really good, and it was about America, et cetera. But it was kind of practice. He loves talking about himself, but he was so focused on Biden and all that type of stuff that he never really laid out what he had done. Well, I think if he was smart, and you truly believe that there's just a sliver of undecideds and swing voters or people who want to vote third party and you need to bring them back, which is going to be a problem for both sides, is that it's hard for him to act a little bit more like an adult and talk about the future. What's the future look like, right? You got to talk about where you're going to bring people. You just said this, really. And so there's a little bit of the past because you have two presidents, but he needs to be efficient and actually have something to say about what he's going to bring to the table about the future. Literally an agenda. 80% of President Biden's 20 ads were about the agenda he wanted to fulfill. And by the way, he's done it. And that was really important because we found that he didn't want us talking about Trump. It got in the way. And we're going to have two candidates who, in a lot of ways, people have made their mind up. Like 98% of people have made their mind up, right? And so you're going to be talking to a sliver. It's really not to red meat for your base this time. I don't think. So I think that my advice to him would be, don't forget to lay out an agenda.
Todd, I'm going to go to you with your own unique question. Yeah. So, and we'll be going down the line with each. I've customized questions for each of you. So you did Marco Rubio's campaign in 2016. You saw firsthand how to take on President Trump. What are some lessons you learned in 2016 doing that campaign that the crop of Republicans are ignoring?
I think what on Trump directly, but I don't know that that's true. The three-dimensional chess that you have to play, and I'll give you a good example. If I sat down here and said, God, Doug, that is just the ugliest jacket. The first thing all of you would do is look to see if you thought it was ugly or not. The second thing you would all do is think, God, Todd is an asshole. The same dynamics are true in politics. If you are playing in anything other than a binary, like general election campaign where there are two candidates, every time you attack, when candidate A attacks candidate B, it hurts candidate A or B, but it can also ricochet and hurt candidate A, and then it accrues to the benefit of C, D, and E. So the first thing that you have to remember is that, taking on Trump, who had this rock solid base of about a third of the party, there was no guarantee that if you were to attack him, that it would accrue in your benefit. Secondly, we were going after different groups of voters. There wasn't a ton of overlap in terms of like the Trump-Rubio voter. And so it was the voters that actually, the lowest hanging fruit for us were actually Ted Cruz voters and a lot of evangelicals. And so that's why you saw a lot of back and forth between us and Cruz. We never understood, other than for personal reasons, why Jeb had it out for Marco, because every vote that you peeled off of Marco, it did not go to Jeb. So Sarah, why did that happen? So that's a lesson that it gets written about a lot today, like, oh, they're making the same mistake that the candidates made 8 years ago. The other one, the one thing that I think that we did do correctly that I wonder why campaigns aren't doing today, we knew that the single greatest asset we had in terms of campaign communications was Marco speaking directly to voters. Usually in the form of TV ads. Our ads were almost always extremely simple. Marco straight to camera, because he's a great communicator. And so we made a conscious decision that we were not going to outsource our entire campaign to super PACs, because super PACs are not by law able to deliver those kinds of messages. The campaigns today, I know they're all out working hard, trying to raise hard dollars, but the degree to which super PACs have supplanted the actual campaigns themselves is staggering, and I think it's actually hurting the ability of some of these candidates to get their message out. And I say that as someone who is working for one of the super PACs.
Steph, you were the deputy campaign manager for the Obama re-elect in 2012, which is, in my estimation, one of the best campaigns that was ever run. Re-elect of Bush was also a really good campaign. Re-elects are unique, and I'm curious, what are some of the advantages?
You know, theoretically, you don't have a primary. Let's put aside what's happening today. But because you don't have a primary, you can raise primary dollars and general election dollars and spend a lot of those primary dollars on foundation building. So in 2012, you know, we were in a similar economic spot as we are today, different economic metrics, but in terms of how people felt about the economy, they just weren't feeling like whatever was happening was benefiting them. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. A lot of the decisions that were made in the financial crisis were to the benefit of big corporations or big banks, not to them, but they were bearing the brunt of it. So we had a lot of work to do to remind people why they liked Barack Obama in the first place. And we were able to use a lot of primary dollars doing that while the Republicans battled it out. So we started that early, doing, you know, the organizing that the Obama campaign was so known for, where we would have neighborhood captains doing meet and greets and volunteer signups and all of the things you do to lay your groundwork to have a strong grassroots mechanism in place for when you are battling it out in a general. We also, not on the record from the campaign or on TV, but largely through the DNC, were able to try to disrupt the Republican primary a little bit. You know, when Santorum was having that surge, we were egging it on at a local level. When Newt Gingrich had his surge, we're like, oh yeah, nobody harder to run against than Newt Gingrich.
We'd hate to face him.
Yeah, but we knew all along it was going to be Romney. So we also did a lot of research on Mitt Romney through those primary months. And I think it would be safe to say that we knew more about Romney's Bain career than the Romney campaign did at that point. Well, we at least figured out how to use it. But a lot of the seeding the ground on opposition research happens well before you see it break out in the open. So there's a financial advantage, there's a time advantage in getting ready for a general election, and there is just a strategic advantage in knowing exactly how you're going to run against someone as soon as the other party's primary starts to come up from underwater. I was on the Bush-Kerry race in '04 as well, and I don't want to get into it too much because Kevin was on it and he can speak to the Bush campaign, which was an incumbent campaign. But I know what it felt like to be part of one of those primary campaigns on the other side. And we were broke. We were exhausted. We had to cede all research on George Bush to the DNC, which, great, that was fine, but you weren't, from your strategic standpoint, weren't in control of it to be able to guide it. And coming out of that, as soon as we weren't even fully out of it, but I remember West Virginia, Howard Dean was still in the race. We're still competing with him. And the Bush campaign showed up at one of our town halls, got John Kerry saying, I voted for it before I voted against it. And that ad hit the airwaves before we could even say we won. And that was definitional in terms of how the press viewed the Kerry campaign, how voters viewed the campaign. Turns out it was just the precursor for what they were about to throw at us. But that coming out of a competitive primary like that, you're at a huge disadvantage. So, long story short.
That's great. Okay, Kevin, so you've been, most recently, you were in a primary advising Mitt Romney in 2008. That was a primary campaign that you didn't win, but you did win it in 12. I want to ask you for your assessment of Ron DeSantis's campaign, because I do believe, you know, he was, and because he was the person who was supposed to be the person who could beat Trump, right? All of this talk about his campaign. He's from Florida, a governor, won overwhelmingly re-election. Something went wrong. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be fixed. It might be able to be fixed. But I just wanted to get your assessment of what do you think went wrong or has gone wrong, and what does he need to do to regain his footing so that maybe he, you know, pulls a surprise and finishes better than expected in Iowa or New Hampshire?
So it's a great question, and I think it does give you a good lens into like the current dynamics that are shaping this race when you think about like what he did right, what he did wrong, or what he needs to do to sort of get back on track. I think the first thing that I would say, and I think everybody on this panel has this experience, and of course many of the folks in the audience who've worked on campaigns, but there is nothing more difficult than a presidential campaign. Take your busiest, craziest, most hectic day. Take all the bullshit that's going up on Capitol Hill right now that's happening with the speaker race. The worst, craziest day in Tallahassee, the worst, craziest day up on Capitol Hill, it's like that every single day, 3 to 4 times a day on a presidential campaign. So these folks who are like, oh, you know, I'm a national political figure, and I'm a really strong conservative, and he's really great in this state, or he's a governor from this state, and he's got this record and this profile, and the media loves him, and the conservative media loves him, and none of that shit matters, because the second you get into it is essentially the process of begging for the right to be humiliated. And doing that every single day, where you have you say something in New Hampshire in the morning, and by the time you get to your event in South Carolina in the afternoon, it is being dissected and it's being played over and over. And you've got 5 to 6 other campaigns inside the primary, as well as an incumbent's political party operation, all dropping oppo or pushing out context on it that sort of disrupts your message. For the average sort of governor from Tallahassee, that's entirely brand new. So I think he came in with a very high level of self-value about his role in the campaign as a national figure and being able to win in a tough battleground state. But it's nothing like the test of a presidential campaign. Those Klieg lights are very real. And so I think it shocked him. And I think you look at how you hire a team and you build a campaign. Remember, if you were to track Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, even I think maybe Cisco, some of these big startup companies, and you were to track their growth in employees and the growth in how much money they spent in their first 2 years, a presidential campaign actually outpaces it. So you're essentially running one of the biggest startups in the world when you're building a campaign from concept to nomination and reality. And this is a the only way to learn it is to actually do it. So a lot of these first-time candidates, whether it was Scott Walker or Rick Perry or all these people who came in with very high expectations, President Wes Clark, like all of these guys,
Yeah.
they meet the reality of this, and it's like a holy shit moment. I mean, I remember seeing like John Huntsman, the look on John Huntsman's face after like 1 month in the campaign. It was like he had a 1,000-yard stare. He couldn't believe it. And it's just a very, very tough thing. You either get that in the first month and your staff gets it, or you disappear.
Yeah.
Now, DeSantis, I think one of his main problems is that he has been trying to figure out his message and his sort of broader appeal on the fly. And you can't wing it in one of these campaigns. Probably the most important lesson I ever learned in presidential campaign politics was back in the 2004 race, when the campaign staff all went over to the White House for a meeting, and it was like charts and graphs and spreadsheets and all this, and everybody was all ready to go and talk to the president about what this message was and the strategy and the thing. And the president walked down and he went to the campaign senior staff, and he's like, here's how I see it. 4 things. I want my message to be this. I want the campaign to be organized this way. We're going to, make sure that we're on offense, and we're going to build a campaign that's built from the ground up. Does everybody understand that? Everybody understands that? Great. Go and do likewise. And that campaign meeting lasted 25 minutes. And the entire operation for the next 2 years, from the person who was answering phones as a volunteer to the campaign manager, reflected those 4 principles in every single thing that they did. And I think right now, a lot of these campaigns, they don't have a theory of the race. They don't have a message that's driven by the candidate. A lot of it's poll tested, and a lot of them, they're winging it and trying it out. And they're sort of being very reactive to the different, trends and news cycles that sort of change every 24 seconds on this campaign. And as a result, you don't really have a clear sense of what it is that how they're going to win, with what message, and what they're going to do if they were to ever become president. And so I think that gray area has created this moment right now where we're just nobody sees anybody really breaking through to beat Trump. And so I think that's been DeSantis's key problem.
Can I add? It's not my question, but it really
Go ahead.
It really helps to be likable. America can sniff out an a-hole,
Yeah.
right? And the other thing is that if you know anything about Florida politics, it is a monarchy. It's a dictatorship. I mean, they have super majorities in the legislature. He's gotten everything he's wanted. He hasn't. And if you're running in Florida, you're doing it on TV. It's not a real retail place if you're a Republican. And I just think that he was so unprepared because of his 4 years of being the king of Florida. Anyway, I thought I'd add that. You can add on to my question.
I want to build on the likability question for you, John, because we touched on this yesterday.
As the most likable panel member.
Yes, right. As the most likable panel member. You touched on this a little bit yesterday, but Democrats have a problem with men. They've had a problem with non-college educated white men for a while now, and you're starting to see more problems with black men and Latinos. I wanted to ask you, as the pollster for the president who's done a ton of survey research across this country, what's going on and how can the Democrats fix that problem?
Yeah. Well, it's like the famous SNL skit, more cowbell, more females, right? I mean, listen, in the fixing of the problem is, first of all, it's not a Biden problem, right? It's a Democratic problem. It predates him. I would go back to Todd Harris, who I thought was incredibly insightful, talking about when these divisions started, NAFTA, that decimated 1,000 communities in America and put basically middle-aged white non-college educated men out of work. Okay, this is when it all started. So this is not a Biden problem. This is a bigger structural problem. I actually think that one of the things why President Biden has an advantage in this race is that he has a lot to talk about in terms of his accomplishments. And he did a really good job of laying out his agenda and his vision in 2020, and he accomplished a lot of that. And we also know that it's incredibly popular but people aren't aware of this. And it's like, I get really tired of the press, right? Of always like, you didn't get your message out. I mean, we heard it in
I
Obama.
thought it was the liberal media
No,
was...
no, it's just like we heard it in Obama, right? With Obamacare, you're just not getting your message out. You know, Bush heard it with Medicare Part D. You know, Trump heard it with his stuff. We are in a diffused media environment where, you know, people get their. We've talked about this, right? It's almost impossible in the modern presidency now to like penetrate on these so-called accomplishments. Guess when we do it? It's when we spend $3 billion in a presidential campaign. They in terms of number of ads, digital, TV, radio, et cetera, they estimate $2.7 billion. And that's where, you know, Trump and Biden will be talking about their vision. The fact is, Joe Biden has something to say. I mean, he has something to say about BIF being bipartisan. And building infrastructure, he has something to say. But this
Okay.
goes to your man. I know. I'm not going to give a campaign speech, but this goes to how you get. I believe you narrow the margins. This isn't about winning men. This is about just give me 3.5% more of the margin, right? But the fact is that bring the supply chain back, bringing manufacturing jobs back. When you talk, you know, to white men and non-college educated and people of color as well. The pride of bringing back manufacturing jobs to Michigan, to Pennsylvania, to Wisconsin, et cetera, I think is one of the ways to do it. Second, so that's one. I mean, we have some stuff to talk about bipartisan. We have some stuff to talk about, again, that pride. The one thing that we have not talked about, because people just love to talk about young people, is seniors. The fact is that Trump beat Hillary big with seniors. Biden narrowed the gap to almost dead even. In 2022, seniors went for Democrats by 1 point in the swing districts. And guess what Joe Biden has done to get, again, senior men? $35 insulin, $2,000 prescription drug cap yearly, negotiating with Medicare. Seniors vote. Senior enthusiasm is always higher than young people. And right now, we're actually competing with them as better than anyone has since 2000, Al Gore, right? So, you know, in your list of things to track in this election, we should be tracking seniors.
Gotcha.
So I think we have a lot to talk to them about. I think that there's a wall up, and I think we all know that there's a wall up. But again, this is about narrowing the margins by a couple points. And I think that we have what we need to do.
All right, so this question is for my friend Betsy Fisher. I don't know if this looks familiar. It says Florida, Florida, Florida. So my question is Florida going to be in play this year? And Stephanie, as the last Democrat to actually win Florida at the presidential level, which was Barack Obama in 2012, I'll start with you.
Well, Florida has become increasingly difficult for Democrats. And it used to be Ohio that was like Lucy in the football, where, you know, you'd get up right to the finish line, you think you're going to win it by 1 or 2 points, and they just pull it out from underneath you, and you've lost by 6 points, and you never saw it coming. Florida has been that in the last 3 cycles and presidential cycles. We can win at the local level, but it is selective and it's really expensive. And so on a presidential campaign, you have to make choices of how you're going to get to 270. And one thing we learned from 2 Obama races is that you want more than one path to get to 270. Florida is obviously a big path. I can't remember how many electoral votes because it's been a while since we've really competed there. But, you know, will the Biden campaign compete there? Yes. Is it where they're going to put most of their investment? Probably not. Because there are other states that are moving in our direction. Georgia, North Carolina. I think we have a better chance of winning those now because of politics on the ground, demographic changes, and policy decisions that were made through the Biden administration and Trump. So that being said, what Anzalone just said, $35 insulin, a cap on prescription drugs at $2,000, Medicare negotiation where Medicare, as a bulk buyer, can negotiate with drug companies and negotiate those prices down. It's something that we've wanted for a very long time, and will finally make Medicare competitive with the rest of the healthcare industry. Those will have a significant impact. It's slowly rolling out. I think this is the first year where the cap comes into play. The insulin is already implemented. You know, if I were on the Biden campaign, I would be doing significant testing in southern Florida to see what the persuasion numbers are. But there are lots of, Florida is
Complicated?
very complicated. It's almost like a macro microcosm of the United States in terms of the demographics, the communities. It is not an easy state to run a statewide campaign with a national message in. So I'm not sure if I answered yes or no.
Perfect answer then.
Okay.
I'm throwing the softball up to our Florida expert here. Todd, what do you think?
I was going to say the exact same point that Stephanie ended with. Florida, it's important to look at Florida the way that most people look at like the overall electoral map, because the state itself is so complicated. And I'll just do a really quick, if you start with Miami, heavy Cuban population, the older generation, very conservative, younger generation, still conservative, but not quite as conservative. You start heading north into Broward County, very liberal, but tons and tons of Republicans still. We don't need to win Broward, we just need to not get blown out. If you head west, you have the whole Gulf Coast on the Western Gulf, tons of Midwestern retirees, culturally very different than just across the state on the East Coast. Keep heading north, the I-4 corridor, Tampa and Orlando. This is where you're going to win or lose your election. Very expensive advertising. Go a little north, you're in the swamps, so you can keep going. After that, then you get into the Panhandle. With the exception of Jacksonville, the Panhandle is, you're basically southern Alabama, southern Georgia. These are Floridians that have thick southern accents. Culture, this is the home of Matt Gaetz. Culturally very conservative. So you can imagine with that kind of as your table setting, trying to figure out how to message in all of those different regions, one unifying theme, one unifying message. And it's really hard. I would say structurally, the state has moved in our direction, by 8 or 9 points over the last 12 years or so. It would be difficult for Democrats, for sure. But I cannot imagine that they would just outright concede it, because it would, every penny that the Democrats put into Florida, we probably need to put 2 in just to make sure that we lock it up. And so if for no other reason than sort of the politics and the spending strategies, making us spend money there is going to be important.
And can I just add one thing? I believe, but others might know more, I'm looking at Sarah, that they're trying to get a ballot measure on the ballot in 2024 on abortion. And it's a huge question in my mind what impact that would have in Florida. But like, Anzo said earlier, Democrats aren't trying to win white men. We just need to close the margin a little bit. That could have an impact with older white women, younger college students. It could be a driving force in people coming out to vote, because that's also an issue in Florida. It's really hard to get people to come out to vote. So I just want to, I had forgotten to mention that, but that's a big variable.
Can I throw one other thing in? We never talk about it because it's Florida and it's so expensive. The most vulnerable Republican up in 2024, Rick Scott. Numbers are completely upside down. So if we could get a billionaire who had spent most of his life in the military to run, right, self-funder, like we really could take him on. But I'm serious about it. He is, like, if there is a self-funder, Rick Scott's number is upside down. Matter of fact, DeSantis's numbers after all of that he's done with the book banning and the abortion limits, et cetera, his numbers are upside down in Florida.
Kevin, I want to move to foreign policy. Obviously, with both the situation in Ukraine and also the situation in the Middle East, it is front and center, especially in the news. All of the coverage right now on almost every news channel is about what's going on in Gaza and Israel, and I think then Ukraine, and then the speakership. But do you expect? Well, first of all, do you expect foreign policy to be, let's fast forward, a top issue in this campaign? And then the second thing is, I think there's this interesting thing happening within the Republican Party where Democrats could potentially use foreign policy as a wedge issue in the same way that Republicans have used wedge issues against Democrats. Never, right? But I just wanted to, and also, and you can go anywhere you want with this question. But the last real campaign where foreign policy was a big issue, it was an issue in 2008, but obviously I think more so in 2004. Both of you were involved in that. So I just want to get your thoughts on foreign policy, national security, and how that plays in 24.
It's a good question, and I think it is going to have an impact on this race, of course, I think, because for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, foreign policy, national security is never driven, or I should say, that issue is never really it doesn't shape campaigns the same way economic issues, trade or domestic policies, because those, it's trend lines, right? It's the trend lines on the economy and whether people feel good or bad, or is the country going in the right direction, wrong direction. That's largely, I think, what sort of drives people's belief on whether or not they're better off than they were 4 years ago. So I think that features much more prominently. But those trend lines, and we see it in every single campaign, you tie the people's sentiments about the economy very closely with somebody who's running as an incumbent, it usually can predict the outcome of the race. National security and foreign policy is always driven by events, and it usually shapes and frames the debate that people have about a candidate's attributes. Is this person a strong leader? Is this person decisive? Do I feel secure knowing that that person is in the Oval Office making executive decisions? And so I think in that case, foreign policy does have an impact, and those leadership attributes are important when people sort of decide who they're going to support. I think in this particular case, one of the things is that it's seen as during times of national security conflict, the commander-in-chief attribute usually works to the incumbent's advantage, and particularly somebody like Biden, who has been working in national security and foreign policy for the better part of 40 years, right, having done it through the Senate. And so I think people expect that the default position would be to his advantage. But we also have to remember one thing, is that this is one of his main arguments as president was that I'm going to bring normalcy and stability, and I'm going to get rid of the volatility that you had during the Trump years. And right now, I think if you talk to a lot of voters and you ask them how they feel, they're very worried about the various tinderboxes of political and I should say national security instability around the globe. And the potential, I think, so the name of this panel is what to watch for. I think all of these conflicts are not going to be very easily solved. I mean, you have a potential with the Israeli conflict in Gaza. That could be a very long, drawn-out process, and you also have the potential for it to be a three-front war, and that makes the argument that, hey, I brought stability and I have brought sort of leadership to the table on this very hard to answer in the affirmative. One of the other advantages I think that Biden will have is that he's running against Trump, and Trump, for everybody, anytime people use the word Trump and policy, I start to cringe because he really doesn't have a policy. He has an attitude. Now, one of the things that's going to work to Trump's advantage is that, and this is sort of a line from the House of Cards, but in House of Cards they say public opinion does not have a law degree. Well, they also don't have, degrees from the School of Foreign Policy at Georgetown either, right? And so public opinion is very, very much shaped by how people feel and what attributes they're subscribing to a particular leader. And the thing about Trump that worked in 2016 was that he talked in a way that made people believe that he was a truth teller or he had clarity of mission on national security and foreign policy. Whereas Hillary Clinton was somewhat sort of burdened by nuance and diplomacy and the complexities involved with actually solving the problem. So in many ways, one of the things I would worry about with Biden, if I were one of his national security team, is that we're burdened by some very, very delicate negotiations that are getting more and more difficult by the day, and the sort of map of challenges that we have continues to expand. And we can't speak about it the way Donald Trump is going to a really rabid audience that just wants to hear, let's bomb the shit out of them. And, and I say that because he said that before. Like, that's been his foreign policy on certain national security things. And then having to sort of draw a contrast with that is somewhat hard given the complexity of the issues. So it is definitely going to play a role here. But it's not necessarily clear that it's going to be an advantage to the advantage of the incumbent commander-in-chief.
Anyone else want to take this? Okay. Steph, how concerned are you about the rise of misinformation? Obviously we have a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, how that could be used in campaigns, but you all did in 2012 a really good job of batting back a lot of the craziness that was being directed at the president. But we're in a different place now, where that so much of this information now is being picked up on, social media platforms that aren't being really, policed. And so how concerned are you, and what do you think the campaigns need to do to deal with misinformation that they're inevitably going to face? And this is going to be something that both sides have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let me take us back. Every 4 years, there is a new challenge like this. Not necessarily to the degree of artificial intelligence, but just going back to 2004, that was the first campaign that really was able to harness the internet for fundraising, for maybe organizing a little bit, but it was disconnected from what was happening on the ground. But one of the things that it was used for was disinformation. That's how swift boats, if you remember the attacks on John Kerry for his record on swift in the Vietnam War, that all started through viral emails that we couldn't see, didn't know they existed until we got much further along into the general election campaign. And blogs. Blogs are still around, but things are so much more sophisticated now. In 2008, we had the rise of Facebook, where Obama's campaign was credited with figuring out how to use Facebook. And text messaging, it seems so quaint now, but text messaging was a huge deal in 2008. In 2012, you had multiple social media platforms that you were dealing with, but it was really the rise of Twitter. But at that point, Twitter was mostly a media influencing tool. It hadn't reached a consumer level at a mass level that it made a difference in the campaign. But you could drive a media narrative through what you were doing on Twitter. And then in 2016, you have the Russian sabotage of social media platforms and the hacking of Hillary and DNC emails, computer bases. And we always dealt with hacking, and I know both sides always do, but not to this degree. They're ever rarely let in, but they were on the Hillary campaign. And it took a lot of time and oxygen and effort to beat that back, and arguably, they never really successfully did that. So fast forward to 2020, same type of misinformation exists, but the social media platforms have gotten smarter about not letting these fake accounts take hold, or taking disinformation off of platforms or shutting down sites. We can argue, amongst ourselves whether they were quieting one side versus the other at a higher level. But the point I'm trying to make is that they learned and maybe overlearned from their mistakes from 2016. So now we're in the run-up to 2024. Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time, but artificial intelligence, the way people are using it now, is it's hard to trace. It's there's zero regulation of it, and certain companies like ChatGPT have just put it out there with no harness around it, and saying to the government, well, yeah, you really ought to regulate this. And as we know, and we've talked about through several panels today and yesterday, Congress is not going to do that anytime soon. So what do? We've already seen it appear in the Republican primary. I think it was DeSantis who did a radio ad. No, it was a TV ad, but using his voice. Trump used AI to generate Trump's voice on an ad. And I don't think they disclosed it. Did they?
No, but the bigger one, they had him giving a speech, and during the speech, a bunch of fighter jets, like perfectly timed, flew over him.
For DeSantis?
That never actually happened.
Yeah. So everybody is grappling with this. Social media platforms, how do they make it clear that something is AI generated? And do they require that if they're allowing a campaign to put paid media on their site? Do people generating AI-driven content, do they have to put some sort of a watermark on it? How do TV broadcast stations handle this? Everybody's grappling with how to put confines on it, and we're not there yet. So it is the Wild West, and a lot of damaging things could happen. So.
Well, I have a whole bunch more questions that I'll have to get to when we're having a beer later. But thank you to this incredible panel, Todd, Stephanie, Kevin, Anzo. Great. I think we're going to take a break. Are we taking a break or no break? We're taking a short break. 5 minutes.